Hello guys, welcome back. In the previous video, we understood what machine learning is and how computers can learn from data. If you haven't watched that video yet, I'll add a link in the top right corner. I highly recommend watching that video first because this series is designed step by step, and following the sequence will help you understand these concepts much more easily. Usually, people start learning deep learning immediately after machine learning. But have you ever wondered where the idea of deep learning actually came from? The answer is the human brain. Scientists spent decades studying how our brain learns, recognizes information, and makes decisions. Although computers do not work exactly like our brain, many of the ideas behind artificial neural networks were inspired by the way biological neurons communicate with each other. So before we understand deep learning, let's first understand the biological system that inspired it. Let's begin with the human brain. The human brain is one of the most complex organs in the human body. It acts as the body's control center and is responsible for everything we think, feel, learn, remember, imagine, and do. It controls every voluntary and involuntary activity in our body, from solving a mathematics problem to simply breathing while we sleep. The brain can be divided into three major parts. The first part is the cerebrum. It is the largest part of the brain, making up about 85% of its total weight. Different regions of the cerebrum perform different functions. The frontal lobe is responsible for planning, decision-making, problem-solving, and controlling voluntary movements. The parietal lobe processes touch, pressure, pain, temperature, and helps us understand where our body is in space. The temporal lobe is responsible for hearing, language, and many aspects of memory. The occipital lobe processes the visual information received from our eyes. The second part is the cerebellum. Although it is much smaller than the cerebrum, it contains more than half of all the neurons in the brain. It is mainly responsible for balance, posture, coordination, and making our movements smooth and accurate. The third part is the brain stem. It connects the brain to the spinal cord and controls many life-supporting functions that happen automatically, such as breathing, heart rate, swallowing, and digestion. Now that we have a basic understanding of the brain, let's understand its most important building block, the neuron. A neuron is the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system. It is a specialized cell designed to receive, process, and transmit information throughout the body. Let's understand the different parts of a neuron. The dendrites receive signals from other neurons. These incoming signals travel to the cell body, where they are combined and processed. If the combined signal is strong enough, the neuron generates an electrical signal called an action potential. This electrical signal travels through the axon until it reaches the axon terminals, where the neuron passes the information to other neurons. In simple words, dendrites receive information, the cell body processes it, and the axon sends it to other neurons. Now, here's something interesting. Even though neurons communicate with each other, they usually do not physically touch one another. Between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron, there is a tiny gap called a synapse. When an electrical signal reaches the axon terminal, it triggers the release of special chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters travel across the synapse and bind to receptors on the next neuron, allowing the signal to continue. Just think about that for a moment. This process happens billions of times, every single second, inside your brain. Now, you might have an interesting question. If neurons can only receive, process, and transmit signals, then how do we actually learn? How do we remember information? How do we recognize our parents, our friends, or even a particular color? Let's understand this with an example. Imagine you're teaching a baby a new color, red. On the very first day, you show the baby a red ball. Light reflected from the ball enters the baby's eyes and is converted into electrical signals. These signals travel to the visual areas of the brain where many neurons become active together. Some neurons process the color, some process the shape of the object, while others begin associating this new experience with the baby's existing knowledge. Since this is the baby's very first experience with the color red, the communication between these neurons is still weak. The brain has started learning, but it has not yet become efficient at recognizing that color. Now imagine, over the next few weeks, the baby sees many different red objects: a red apple, a red toy car, a red shirt, a red flower, and a red balloon. Although these objects are completely different, they all share one common feature. They are red. Every time the baby sees another red object, many of the same neurons become active again. Because these neurons are repeatedly activated together, the synapses connecting them gradually become stronger and more efficient. This ability of synapses to strengthen or weaken based on experience is called synaptic plasticity, and this is one of the brain's most important learning mechanisms. It allows our brain to continuously adapt based on our experiences. The more often these neurons communicate, the stronger their connections become, and the faster they can communicate in the future. Now suppose you show the baby a chart containing many different colors and ask, "Can you find the red color?" The baby can quickly identify it, not because there is a single neuron called the red neuron, and not because the brain stored a picture called red like a file inside a computer. Instead, repeated experiences have strengthened the communication between many neurons, allowing the brain to recognize the concept of red almost instantly. Now let's think about something even more interesting. Where exactly is the memory of red stored? Scientists still do not believe that a memory exists inside one single neuron. Instead, memories are understood to be represented by the activity of large networks of neurons and by changes in the strength of the synaptic connections between them. This is one of the biggest differences between a computer and the human brain. A computer stores information as files in a specific memory location. The human brain works differently. Instead of storing experiences like individual computer files, the brain represents experiences through patterns of activity across networks of neurons, whose connections have been shaped and strengthened through learning. Every new experience slightly changes these networks. The more we repeat something, the more efficient those networks become. And that is why repeated practice makes learning easier. Now imagine, the baby doesn't learn only one color. Over time, it learns blue, green, yellow, shapes, faces, voices, words, emotions, places, and thousands of other things. Different groups of neurons become active for different kinds of information. These groups are not isolated. They communicate with many other groups, forming enormous interconnected networks throughout the brain. In fact, the human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, connected by hundreds of trillions of synapses. Because these networks are interconnected, the brain can combine different kinds of information almost instantly. For example, when you see your best friend, your brain doesn't simply recognize a face. Within a fraction of a second, it also remembers their name, recognizes their voice, recalls memories you've shared together, and even brings back emotions associated with them. All of this happens because many interconnected networks of neurons become active together. Scientists studied these biological networks for many years. Although computers are much simpler than the human brain, researchers took inspiration from these biological learning principles and developed simplified mathematical models called artificial neural networks. These artificial neural networks eventually became the foundation of deep learning. In the next video, we'll finally understand what deep learning is and how artificial neural networks actually work. If you learned something new from this video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.